we know that the American working class, much like the working class, across the rest of the world, is unfortunately very alienated and increasingly depoliticized. And as you said, it's no wonder when, especially in this country, we have two parties that don't represent the interests of the working class at all. This also, of course, is happening in kind of the context of constant DC chatter and just like politics sort of diffusely floating around in the air, but we don't really have any working class institutions at this point other than, as you just mentioned, the labor movement. So again, like I said, you sort of touched on this, but what do you see as the root cause of this working class alienation?
Ooh, it is a really deep question. I mean, I do think a lot of it is just, the Republicans have always been the party of the rich. When you have the Bill Clinton era come along and he embraces basically like, I'm going to be, basically like them and sort of like shave off some of the rough edges. And in some places, I'm going to go even further than them.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you see the initial erosion of the working class. At first, it's the white working class that shifts away from the Democratic Party. And so there was this intentional decision that, hey, we're gonna this labor union movement, these working class people, like that's the past. The future is these upwardly mobile office workers and professionals. And hey, by the way, we want to be able to play in a game where we can take the corporate money too. And so it's really when you have the complete death of the New Deal era,
Right.
and you have the birth of the Reagan era and the neoliberal era on the Democratic side, that you get full class de-alignment
Mm-hmm.
and continued disengagement from politics and everything collapsing down to these culture wars, which, for the two major parties, the people that run those parties, it's a good deal. They don't have to
Mm-hmm.
do anything. I mean, the Republicans this election cycle, they're openly admitting they're not running on an agenda.
Right. Right.
I mean, they're upfront about it. Like, how brazen is that? And in
Right.
some ways, it's just honest, because
Mm-hmm.
the truth of the matter is, it's probably smart electoral strategy for them. They just say, "Hey, we're not that. We know you hate those guys. We're not them. So show up
Right.
and vote for us." Their base is energized. The Democrats are kind of depressed because Biden hasn't been what they wanted him to be,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, it just collapses down to a politics of nothing.
Right.
You don't have to promise anything. You don't have to deliver anything. All you have to do is, if you're a Democrat, like kneel in kente cloth, and if you're a Republican, own the libs, and
Right.
you're good
Right.
to go.
Right.
You're gonna and even when they lose, like, they don't really lose, at least for the people who are in power.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of money made and a lot of books sold and a
Yep.
lot of fame gained during the Trump years. They were perfectly fine being in opposition. So they want to win, but they only want to win if they can do it in the way that's comfortable for them and comfortable for the donor class.
Right. And as you pointed out, when they lose, they still kind of win. So,
Yeah, that's it.
yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So I definitely agree with you that there do seem to be some, reasons for hope or some bright spots that are kind of percolating in our political environment right now. But something I've been thinking about is since, the end of Bernie's back-to-back bids for the presidency, I think something that the left has really struggled with is breaking out of kind of urban centers. So
Mm,
if you look at like New York or San Francisco, those cities have vibrant DSA chapters that are doing really impressive work. But at the same time, these are places that are sort of deeply concentrated again in cities and on the coasts. The left, for a long time has been struggling to kind of break through and appeal to rural voters. Why do you think that is, and do you think that can be changed?
I do think it can be changed, but
Yeah,
I think it's a difficult project and it's a long-term project, and it
yeah,
definitely has to do with the reinvigorated labor movement, the
hmm,
sort of things we saw with the teachers movement, with the John Deere strike, where you
yep,
had true solidarity across all kinds of ideological divides and people actually working on a project together that was tangible and was material. And I don't think we can deny that part of the collapse in support for anything left of center, let alone actual leftism, is because of this instinct towards subtraction rather than addition. And what I
hmm,
mean by that is, the most energy oftentimes on the broad left today is about, judging whether people are worthy human beings, whether you can associate with them, whether you can quote unquote platform them, whether they deserve a voice in polite society. And so if you're constantly sending out the message to people that may not be 100% with you or even 80% with you, but their minds could be open, they could be with you on some key issues. If you're just constantly putting out the message like, we hate you, we have contempt for you, we think you're wrong, we think you're evil, we think you're racist, we think you're bad, yeah, they're not going to vote for you, they're not going to support you, they're not going to come to you, show up to your meetings.
Right.
So I think this loss of it's almost like it's not a serious project anymore. People are just in there playing for their own personal clout, for what can be gained from, naming and shaming some other person as not left enough, or not phrasing, not using the right language on a certain issue. That's where the sort of fame and notoriety, I guess, comes from. So that's not a serious project of political change. That's about like personal brand building versus any kind of solidarity or collective action. It's poisonous to any sort of solidarity or collective action. So that's to me the big obstacle. I mean, on economic issues and even on a lot of cultural issues, the left is popular. People want to have healthcare. They want to have guaranteed healthcare. They want to have good public education. They want to have high wages. They want to more people than ever, before. It's like record high numbers for support for unions. The issues aren't the problem. It's that people get the sense that we don't want you in the club, that you don't belong. And more than any, I know there's all this debate about like defund the police and all this stuff. And I do think that rhetoric is off-putting, but I think that's so far from the biggest problem. There's no, there's very few politicians who are out there even embracing that rhetoric. One other thing that I want to say, because a lot of times this move towards, this kind of like, I hate the term cancel culture, but like that move towards censorship is oftentimes sort of pinned on the left and the focus on narrow identity issues versus a broader politics that has more universalism, that it, can build solidarity. I mean, this really came from the neoliberals. This was like, Bernie Sanders was derided as a racist for running on a universalist platform and, told he was horrible, and the whole Bernie bro thing and his toxic supporters and all of that. So that direction of politics really didn't actually, it wasn't birthed by the left, the actual left. This came from liberals who wanted to signal their virtue, but not actually deliver for people.
Yeah. I think something that's maybe related to the question of kind of like political identity or partisan identity is something that we've covered on the show before, and I know you and Sagar have as well, is the fact that today more voters identify as independents rather than Democrats or Republicans. And again, like, it's not hard to see why, but obviously that is kind of a problem when we're still, locked in a two-party system. So, and especially working class voters say that they're turned off by both parties, right? So I guess like, do you see a path for sort of moving beyond partisan politics?
No.
I know, right? I was kind of hoping you would have like
I wish I did.
I mean, it sucks that the Democrats are the only game in town, but I
just look at, I'm both an idealist, and I believe in, I truly do believe in the people of this country, even though, this is a little bit of a tangent, but like with Ukraine, the public support is like all in favor of no-fly zone and all these things that I think are terrifying and awful. But you can also see like the humanity of the American people who are like watching the suffering and just trying to figure like, what can we do? We want to do something. And even being willing, like, it's like 75% of the country's like, we'll pay higher gas prices if it helps.
Right.
I mean, that's really something, you know? So I am an idealist and I believe in that. But I just think that if we look on the practical side at past history, what's come closest to actually working has been the Bernie Sanders campaigns. You can also see a model in, on the other side of the aisle for sort of hijacking a major political party and using it towards your ends, both with the Tea Party and with Trump, who ends up being the guy that just carries the water for Paul Ryan and like the Cokes and doing but they didn't know that was going to be the direction. It didn't have to be the direction. It's just he's such a, empty piece of crap. But so that has more promise to me, even as I recognize that there's massive barriers, the media being one, the party cartel, I mean, the way that they can rig the system, those are all very real things. I'm not saying it's a piece of cake. But when I look in comparison to, even the best performance of third parties right now, it's not even close.
Right.
So, yeah, I think if you just kind of logically evaluate the evidence, you have to say that the best you can do right now is to throw your energy into any little green shoots in the labor movement and try to work to, to change the Democratic Party into something that actually benefits working class people. And I think I've been thinking about this lately too, just from a political messaging perspective. I think the way to pitch this is like a reclamation of the Democratic Party. Like they've gone astray, and we need, they used to be about the broad working class and about labor unions, and that used to be where they planted their flag, and they've gone astray. So this is a movement to bring them back to a more accurate reflection of what they're supposed to be about, versus we're going to do something totally crazy and totally new that you've never seen before, because that does freak people out. And I think if you do that, a lot of those independent voters that you're thinking of, people that I know that I've spent a lot of time with, that are my close friends, and places I've lived, like rural Virginia and Kentucky and the industrial Midwest in Ohio, they would respond to that message. I mean, that's part of why Bernie had so much traction with working class voters in 2016 in particular, white working class voters in 2016 in particular, is because they were like, oh, you don't like the Democratic Party? We don't like the Democratic Party either. And some of us used to be that. And so we have a kinship there. So I do think that there's a sort of messaging opportunity there. But yeah, it's a sad state of affairs, but I think that's the way we have to approach things. It's the most likely to be successful. And I would be delighted to be proved wrong on that front. I'm not down on third party efforts. I think they're valuable. I think they matter. I think they're extremely helpful as well as part of the political landscape. I just practically don't think it's the most likely direction for change.
Right. So I have just one last question for you, and I kind of think I know what you're going to say, but I have to ask it anyway. So you obviously, as you just said, you've worked as a journalist, you've lived in many different places. You've also worked as a political strategist, and actually, for anyone who doesn't know, you campaigned for public office at one point. So,
I did.
So the final question is, given all of that, where do you see the most promise for rebuilding a working class movement in the US, or a broadly populist movement? Where does the most potential seem to lie right now?
Do you mean in terms of geographic regions? Do you mean in terms of...
I didn't, but if you have thoughts on that.
You don't mean literally what place in the country?
Right. Where, what state and city?
Where do we need to go?
I mean, again, if you have thoughts on that, I would love to know. But but just generally,
I'm very
within
partial
our political...
to Kentucky.
Yeah,
I have a lot of
course.
loyalty to Kentucky, so we'll be hopeful for the future of Kentucky, and they're getting their populist cred back. I think, look, the obvious answer is labor, and not just with the efforts to organize Starbucks and Amazon, but you really do see this sea change coming out of the pandemic, of people across classes rethinking their lives and the balance they want to strike and what actually matters. And you got a little white collar rebellion going on right now. And people being like, I'm not coming back to the office. I'll leave my job. Good luck finding someone else. I'm happy working remote or coming in a couple days a week, or I've moved out of the city and I'm living somewhere that I can actually afford a home in. And so, sorry, you're just gonna have to deal with that now. Now the fear is that those gains only stay with the white collar workers, which is often the case. But you do see these working class movements, and that's the only way. I mean, the media is so committed to convincing us that we're enemies, that if you're living in a city, the person in rural America is your enemy, or if you're in rural America, the person in the city is your enemy. If you're a Democrat, the Republicans are your enemy. I mean, if you're, it's just this sort of commercialization of hate and division. I don't want to sound hokey, like there are a lot of real divides, and we should have a divisive politics, but the divide's got to be in the right place. So the only way to overcome that is to actually directly exist with and work with people who are different from you on meaningful projects. And the only space that really happens in a way that is multiracial and multi-ideological is, on the shop floor and in the union hall. So I think that's the direction we have to push in. The numbers are really encouraging in terms of how people are feeling about the labor movement. There's obviously, it's obvious to everyone that neoliberalism has failed. It's just a question of what's going to replace it. So at the same time that the landscape feels kind of like grim and hopeless, I think things can change. The landscape can shift in an instant in a way that you can never contemplate. And anyone who's lived through the past couple of years, I think, has to recognize that.
Well said. All right, Krystal, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time. I'm sure everybody who's watching the show is subscribed to Breaking Points. If not, do that immediately. It's the best news show out there right now.
Thank you.
Krystal, Kyle, and Friends, of course, is also great. You've had on Bhaskar and I believe like a few Jacobin people. So I encourage everybody to check that out as well. All right. Thank you so much, Krystal.
Thank you, Jen. I really enjoy your work. I think you're such a just a really insightful thinker, and the monologues you put together are always so on point. So thanks for spending some time with me.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.